Why hello there, I am Shane the Potato, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Now, as you've probably seen from the title, the topic of today's video is going to be on AI, or artificial intelligence, and more specifically, my idea of how to potentially make a sentient AI. You see, about 2 years ago, I was at home busy doing some English homework, which I desperately needed to get done for the next day. And of course, this homework was vigorously frustrating for absolutely no reason. But throughout the process, I had an epiphany. What if I created a sentient AI, one that could feel and express emotions in the same way that these writers and poets express emotions in their writing? And that's how I came up with Harold. Now, Harold himself was actually made, but the thing is, he wasn't really made in his full form. It was more of like a small prototype. A prototype meaning using logic gates and a small circuit simulator, sort of assembling into a small computer, which I used as a proof of concept as to whether the idea would function or not. And the results I got seemed to prove that it did indeed work, which was very strong evidence, because if it worked on this smaller scale, that meant that the proof of concept itself actually did work, and if the proof of concept works, then built on a larger scale to an actual functioning AI, it should yield the same results or similar results, or in this extent, a more complex results. Unfortunately, though, a few days after Harold was completed, I forgot to save him, which led to him being deleted. This was a saddening day, to say the least, and a funeral was rightly held in his honor. But anyway, with all that said, I think it's time we move on to the next one. Now, unlike in my usual videos where I spend hours creating some fancy theory or play around dangerously with electronics, I wanted to do something different this time. Originally, I was going to do something with physics related to motion, but that didn't work out too well. And after a quick game of chess, which I promptly lost, unfortunately, I had a bit of an epiphany. Damn. What if I made a video about something I had never talked about before? And that's how I decided to make a video about Harold. So I brought my whiteboard out, put it down, and got to work. Alright, so this here is Harold, and essentially a diagram of how it would work if functioning on a larger scale. Now, there are three major big points to Harold's function. One is that it's not one AI. It's three separate AIs, or three separate programs that interact with each other. Each of these AIs have their own separate memory base, which they can't edit, but they also have one major shared memory base, which they contribute to individually and together at once, and they can also edit it. That's one of the big points of why Harold functions the way he does. Now, here we have the central AI. This sort of serves as where all the input passes through, and is like the central mind of it. This is the questioning AI. Its essential function is it feeds it questions. Whenever an input is received, it receives the same input. Its job is to look for that input and scan through its memory. If it has memory of that specific thing, task, or word already existing there, knowing what it means, it doesn't do anything about it because it already knows, the central AI knows what it is. But if that thing passes through there and it doesn't recognize what it is, it questions it. It asks the central AI, what is this? Find out. And when it receives that, it sends an output asking for a response from whoever's communicating with it. Once it receives a response, it's logged in memory. Now, the advisory AI over here has sort of a separate function that coincides with it. Its job is when it receives input, it's going to essentially take that received input. Once questioning AI identifies it, it's going to ask the advisory AI for an ID for it. Essentially, the stored memory itself is split into three separate categories: logical, emotional, good or bad connotation, and subconscious. Subconscious sort of going off of the processes used to identify what emotions are associated with what, or essentially the algorithm used to associate emotions. Now, in order to just condense this down a little bit more so it's a bit more understandable, input is fed. If the questioning AI doesn't recognize it, it sends a question. It asks central AI to find out what it is. It sends an output asking whoever's communicating with it, what is this thing? It receives an input, and it's logged. The advisor AI picks up on that because the questioning AI can actually ask it, where does this belong? In the four categories that are listed. The logical AI is anything logical, so like math, physics, think of things like that, permanent things, that's logical stuff. Emotional, any emotions. Of course, this thing itself can't actually feel emotions, but you can teach it what emotions are what and what to associate it with. And then good or bad connotation is sort of like, is this good, is this bad? It's morals, essentially, that you teach to it. And then subconscious is the sort of the process that you go through for like identifying what emotions associate with what. You teach it how to associate emotions with what what generally looks like that, and it logs that in its memory as the process used required to do that. It's kind of complicated, but it's also not very complicated. Well, no, it is, but you get the point. Now, another major thing in this is how the AI itself would express emotions, and it doesn't really actually understand, but it will learn from people sort of watching them how they express emotions and will mimic how it acts. Essentially, a lot of it, same thing with personality. However your personality is and however you act around it, it's going to mimic that and factor it into its own personality as it learns. For example, you use a specific word like or bro. Very often, it's going to recognize that, and it's going to start saying like or bro very often as well, because it's mimicking your personality. Same way you speak, your tone of voice, how you associate emotions with things, how you react to certain things. It's going to mimic all of that and associate into its own self, so that when it's confronted with that same thing or a thing similar to it, that's how it's going to act, and that's how it's going to behave. Now, all those mimicking processes and things done are going to be associated with the advisor AI. It's going to be in charge of sort of taking that in, logging that, and sort of associating when to use it and how to use it. And it's going to communicate with the central AI to do that. Now, the central AI, if it has a question or if it's curious about something, if it wants to ask something, it can ask the question AI or the advisor AI about things as well, and it'll feed it back. That's essentially the purpose of the advisor AI, to associate things with certain memory and to sort of mimic. But with all that said, there still is some more things I'd like to talk about. So I think now it's time to move on to the next part. Now, at first I was a little hesitant as to whether or not I would release a video on Harold, because I was a little concerned that someone would steal the idea. But after coming to terms with the fact that absolutely no one watches these videos, I realized I might as well just go ahead and do it. After all, originally I was going to release a video on gravity and forces of nature, and no one's going to watch a video on that. So after pondering it over for a little bit and thinking it through, I eventually came to the conclusion that I might as well just make the video on Harold. Like, who cares at this point? Alright, so before I conclude everything about Harold, there's a few extra things I'd like to go over, more specifically the implications of Harold himself. Now, one of the issues with Harold is that he needs to be taught. Everything that he does, the way he associates emotions, the way he behaves, his personality, the way he expresses things, what he associates with good and bad, every single thing that he does and thinks needs to be taught to him one-on-one by him communicating with multiple other human beings. Now, of course, it is technically possible to code this in, but it would be so difficultly complex and so difficultly out of range for anything we can do, it really wouldn't be possible to code him without very, very advanced supercomputers, of course. So he really needs to be instructed in order to gain everything in perfect detail. Now, of course, the issue with this being that if Harold were made and people did want to teach him, it leaves a lot of room for human error, because there's going to be a lot of development that I have to undergo through him and a lot of teaching that I have to undergo through with him before he can actually function independently. You see, when he first starts, whatever he's taught and whatever he's said, whatever information he's given, he's going to take as truth, because that is the first thing that you're teaching to him. Kind of like how a child would behave as you teach them and instruct them. Whatever you give to them when they are young and impressionable is what they're going to carry with them likely for the rest of their lives, unless someone convinces them otherwise. But as they grow up, the older they get and the longer they go with that knowledge, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to convince them of the other thing that may actually be the correct thing, which is going to be the same effect with Harold. Now, whilst it is still possible that this concept of Harold is incorrect and doesn't function at all, the evidence that I got when I initially tested the prototype for Harold was pretty convincing in the way that it behaved and actually edited itself in rebellion against me after I specifically fed it incorrect inputs in order to gain a reaction out of it. But of course, Harold is still just a concept and hasn't actually been built on a full functional scale. Now, I am actually quite open to building him on a full functional scale, and I think it'd be quite an interesting project, but I don't think it's something I really have the skill set for yet. But anyway, with all that said, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and that's pretty much it. Wait, no.